Hi, this is Lisa Anderson, President of LMA Consulting Group and host of Supply Chain Chats. I'm here today with John Tulac, an international business attorney and a global extraordinaire. And we're going to talk a bit about the Russia-Ukraine war and why it's relevant to supply chains and, where we are, where we're standing today and where we're going to go from here. So from that point of view, John, why don't you kick it off on any of those topics and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. So thank you, Lisa, for having me as a guest. It's always a pleasure to be with you and talk about things going on in the world. And one of the hottest parts of the world geopolitically is, of course, the Ukraine-Russian war and its direct and indirect impacts. We're 3 years into this war. And so what we saw at the beginning and severe and immediate supply chain disruptions. Now we have seen how the market globally has responded to those disruptions, some of which are still pretty significant, others of which have been pretty much settled down, or at least with good enough workarounds that life has gone on, albeit usually more expensively, with the occasional surprising difference. So what we can do, if this makes sense, is to go through some of the specific areas, some of the specific sectors, and how then and now the supply chain looks.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, I had some clients that actually had to upfront when the Russia-Ukraine war started. They secured, as much of some key commodities like copper as they could. So, I know commodities, oil and gas, like you said, agricultural type products. So which one would you like to start with, John?
Well, let's start with the thing that makes the world go round, and that's energy. Oil and gas. Russia is a huge producer of both, and they waste more oil, they spill more oil and flare more gas than other oil and gas countries even produce.
Really?
And they are a low cost producer to this day. And so that's why the sanctions to the energy space didn't really work, because they were so low cost, and we set the price above which the Russians couldn't sell at $60 a barrel. Okay, fine, comrades, we'll sell below market. And so who benefited from that? India and China, because they were willing to violate any other sanctions. Although that's changed a bit now too. Chinese banks and Indian banks are increasingly reluctant to fund cargoes from Russia because of the potential impact of their participation in the global financial community. That's a recent and good development as far as the United States is concerned.
Yeah, but that's surprising. I didn't know that.
It's fairly new development.
That had changed.
Yep.
Well, and actually, when you say they're low-cost producer, I'm just curious now. Does that mean they're also like a dirty oil kind of producer, or they're just okay? So they're dirty oil, and they've been doing it a long time, so they're probably efficient at producing dirty oil, if you will.
Right. They don't care about the environment as much as we do, and they don't remediate, they don't clean up, and it's pretty ugly. So that's, of course, another thing that keeps their costs down. Besides lower extraction costs, and which is hard to believe given that some of this comes from very desolate places. And so you are pipelining it in and you are dealing in very harsh weather conditions and so on. But nevertheless, it still pencils out. What was also surprising, both back then and now, is that the war premium that you usually see in terms of oil and gas prices shooting up didn't come anywhere close to what the Goldman Sachs analysts and others of like nature were forecasting. We did not see oil spike above $100 a barrel. We did not see sustained high prices or any shortages, really, other than temporary ones as ships got rerouted and new supply chain routes were created, a new source of supply, all of which really in some ways benefited primarily U.S. producers of liquid natural gas. So we adapted pretty well. The entire world adapted pretty well to the war in terms of dealing with energy and moving cargoes. That was a positive thing. In some of the other areas, not so good. So we didn't hammer Russia so much on some other areas like fertilizers. And one of the derivative
Yeah.
products from the production of oil and gas is urea. And the
Yep.
Russians and the Ukrainians are the two biggest producers of urea in the world. And of course, that at the beginning was an impacted industry because the Russian blockade to the Black Sea and uncertainty. So you were looking at alternative sources of supply if you were places like Brazil or Argentina with big agricultural sectors and India, another one, buying
Right.
almost exclusively urea for your main fertilizer. Now, the good news is that it forced those farmers to look at some alternatives which are not as environmentally devastating as urea is.
That's good. And
The,
where are they produced? Do you know?
yeah. The bad news. I'll come back to that. The bad news is the urea exports have basically gone back to normal, and nobody
Okay.
who could get those cargoes switched to the better alternatives, even though some of those are cost effective, but it takes a calculation to show that. So the alternatives to urea are expensive. Some of them, they are also very effective. But when urea is dirt cheap and you don't care about the
Yeah.
side effects, you're going to buy urea. We have products in the United States that are much better environmentally, but the initial cost is higher. But you don't have the environmental impacts, and you also have better crop yield over time because
Yeah.
urea ultimately degrades
Interesting.
yields. Getting people to understand that and then buy accordingly is an education process that can take a long
It
time.
is. It is. I remember when after the Russia-Ukraine war started, and there was a hurricane in Florida, and there was a lot of concern because of fertilizer that was being produced in Florida as well. To your point, of scarcity of supply. So yeah, but that's, I guess, disappointing. But to your point, it at least brought up alternatives. That is another option in the supply chain, is to look for alternative products. And like you said, this alternative happens to be better, but it is more expensive. So, it's those types of decisions.
Right. And of course, we're all into organic here in the United States, right? Except we're not. The big chemical
Right.
fertilizer companies sell to the farmers here in the United States far more stuff than the organic producers are capable of selling. So it's not
Yep.
something that's a third world problem, or it's global. And it's right here in our own backyard. I want to talk also about some of the other things impacted, since we talked about urea and the impact on agriculture. Ukraine and Russia are both exporters of bulk agricultural products like wheat and corn.
Yep.
Ukraine was more negatively impacted by that, of course, by the war, especially at the outset. Again, the world adjusted pretty quickly. The world needs to be fed, and the world has found a way to continue to feed itself. And today, despite the fact that we have close to 9 billion people on this planet, we still feed ourselves and are capable of continuing to do so. But when there is starvation in the world, it's important to recognize that that is not caused by natural causes. It's caused by human
Right.
interference on the delivery of food. No one in this world should go starving because of lack of food. It's the
It's
ability to
true.
get the food to the people in need. So certainly there were disruptions at the beginning of the war, the potential for the loss of a shipment, a delay of a shipment continues to this day. You see those periodic interruptions. But again, the world supply chains held. They adapted pretty quickly, and folks continue to get what they need to be able to eat and live. Those
Yeah.
are all good things. More of a
Very
scramble
good.
when it came to things like neon and palladium
Yes.
and other strategic metals and minerals, because both Russia and Ukraine provide a lot of those things. China, of course, the biggest producer of a lot of that stuff, but things that we rely on, like uranium, we were getting from Ukraine and Russia. Neon, we're getting 50% of our neon supply, which we need to make chips. not just the highest
Yeah.
quality chips, but a lot of the everyday chips that we use in all kinds of products. So
Well,
that's
it's really
why
quite important.
yeah, those are important, and those the
Absolutely.
lack of those things spike prices, and those prices haven't really come down for the most part. So
Well, and then
inflated
when I was in a medical conference, where like talking about supply chain challenges related to the medical industry, I know that some of these commodities that you're referring to go into medical devices and and other like products. Like for example, my client is in like the industrial sector, really, and they were looking to expand their purchase from, I don't remember if it was Russia or Ukraine, but it was that region of, I think it was copper. So there's a lot of there's a lot of commodities that would impact people over time.
exactly. So there's a whole list of different commodities, different metals, and other raw materials that are inputs to things that we take for granted in our everyday living. And all of those things, in some way, shape, or form, were, and to some extent still are, impacted by the continued war. So if you look at the ripple effect, this is not a regional conflict. If you just forget about the geopolitical implication and just focus on the business aspects of it, this war continues to have global impacts. What we have also seen, however, is the ability of business folk worldwide to adapt, sometimes at a higher cost, but
Yeah.
the world commerce continues, and it shows the resiliency of the system of globalization, all
Yeah.
of which may be jeopardized by the idea of carving out spheres of influence and trying to create managed trade or balanced trade or tariff managed trade or any of those things that will simply lead to even higher prices without addressing the ability of assurance of supply. That's, of course, of concern to me.
Yeah.
We can talk about that some other time. We also have to look ahead. Let's assume that we get a ceasefire and ultimately peace.
Let's hope, right?
You're going to look at 10 years worth of rebuilding in Ukraine and also in parts of Russia. Well, who's going to do that? And
Yeah.
who'll take the risk, number one, and what will it take to bring in the big players and the big money to do that, particularly rebuilding the power sector in Ukraine that's been heavily targeted by Russian missile strikes and so on. So this doesn't build wealth in the country. It restores what's been lost. So
Right.
war is not a wealth builder. The broken window repair is not creating wealth. It's fixing wealth that was once there and is now gone. So this is replacement. It will be very lucrative for the companies that take the risk and participate in it. But it's a volatile region, and there's no long-term history in Ukraine or Russia of private contracting and understanding that. So that's another
Right.
topic of conversation. The long-term impact on the EU and the NATO alliance and so on is at stake with this. So you have to look not only at the geopolitics, but the impact then of what businesses will be allowed to do, and so on in that region going forward. All of which is very fascinating to me, and that part of my job is to advise my clients about the potential risks and rewards of doing business under those circumstances.
Yeah, that's a very good point, John, because from a supply chain point of view, you've brought up so many, really integral points. We have to continually adapt our supply chains, and really we have to be a bit more forward thinking to have backup sources of supply, because certainly these types of conflicts are arising and popping up around the world. We hope that they calm down, but nevertheless, that has been happening. So we have to make sure that we're securing not just backup sources of supply, maybe dual sources of supply. It's more complex, really, to successfully navigate, to your point, as a business through the global supply chain. With that said, as you point out, different areas of the world have different advantages. And so hopefully we can make some of this into a win-win so that we can maintain peace. And we're going to talk a bit more about the cultural aspects and the differences in culture and communications and the impacts on how we should be looking at supply chains in our part 2 of this series. And we'll use Russia-Ukraine as an example. So is there any other last comments, John? And then we will wrap it for part 1.
Well, I'll leave you with this example. In the 90s, anticipating a shortage of certain kinds of semiconductors, Apple struck a 5-year deal for a particular semiconductor it needed for its computers then and what it foresaw for the next 5 years. And they paid a pretty decent price for it, and they were widely ridiculed at the time for it. But in the long run, that turned out to be a fabulously good deal because the price of those semiconductors kept going up for everybody else, and they had an assured source of supply. So sometimes you look ahead at what you can project in terms of your needs, and you bite the bullet, you make your deal, and if nothing else, you can sleep at night that you have your assured supply, even if the price may ultimately move against you a little bit.
I completely agree with that. I saw that happen when I was a vice president of operations and supply chains. We secured enough pulp and paper so that we could produce. And we also, there's a lot of strategic things you can be doing if you're forward thinking and willing to take on some risk, but it turned out to be a smart endeavor. And my client did the same thing by securing a supply for as long as they could get it, which was around a year, so that they could lock in their critical commodity so they can keep the business growth momentum going. So thank you, John. And we will see you again when we return for part 2 about culture and communications.
Thank you, Lisa.